Hello and welcome to ShePack. Today I'm joined by Rapozo, Regional Vice President of Business Development within the behavioral health space. In today's episode, we're discussing Triumph Through Trials, Purpose and Power to Unite. Kara, I'm so excited to have you on the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, no, I'm so excited. Okay, so fun fact that I learned about you is you were previously a Buccaneers cheerleader. So question is, how does one go about becoming a professional cheerleader for the NFL team? I'm asking for a friend.
Yes, I did cheer for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and did that for about 3 years, was part of the organization for 4 years. And I think it's one of the highlights of my life. It was a great experience. I met some of my best friends. And I would say in order to be able to make the team, I mean, every year is a bit different, right, in terms of leadership and what they're looking for. But I tried out 5 times. So from the age of 18 to 25, I tried out 5 times and I knew it was part of my future. I just didn't know when. And I'm really thankful for not having made it till I was 25, because I think I had the maturity, the career, the place in my life that it made the most sense. So I would say for anyone that's looking to be a part of an NFL team in cheering, it's really about being tenacious, putting in the work, knowing what they're looking for. And what I mean by that is every organization that I know of in the NFL requires you to either have a full-time job or be a full-time parent or full-time student. And so just knowing who you are and what you stand for, and also taking the right classes in terms of dance classes, public speaking, whatever it may be, to really give yourself an edge. So those 5 years taught me a lot around really who I was. I would always make it to finals and then not make it. And so finally I said, this is my year. But I took dance classes and I really just leaned into what I thought it would be to be the best type of ambassador, because you really are an ambassador. And my favorite part was being able to be a mentor, if you will, to young children that would come up to you and be so excited for your autograph, and thinking I'm just a girl in social work, but for them, it was a big deal. So I would say, just being able to really put in the work beforehand and knowing what you're wanting out of it can give you an edge in terms of making a team. And it's a lot of work, and taught me a ton about how to be a really good professional in terms of, like, if you're on time, you're late. And so I wouldn't change it for the world. Great experience. And again, I have a lot of good friends from it. Yeah.
Well, kudos to your early manifestation of knowing what it is that you wanted and then having the persistence, because it's one of those things where people may think, they tried out for the first time, not realizing that, no, I actually really invested in myself, took the dance classes. Like you said, I tried out 5 times and then I was able to make it happen. And then it's not just this kind of view of, you're a cheerleader. No, you're an ambassador. You're a mentor to other young children and almost like a spokesperson that's walking around externally to represent the team. So I think that's super exciting and a really cool, fun fact that I learned about you. Now, based on your background, you spent your undergrad studying psychology, which led you into social work, helping children in foster care and adoption. So what initially drew you to this position?
Absolutely. So I've always had a heart for children and just believed in making the world a better place for them. And growing up as a military brat, I always had this sense of social responsibility, and having had, an abusive situation as a youth, not within my immediate family, but I just knew that I wanted to make the world a better place. And so psychology has been something that's just in my DNA. I've always enjoyed it. So I knew that's what I wanted to have my undergrad in. When I graduated, I think as a young lady, I wanted to just change the world. And so I went into social work, and you realize quickly that it takes a lot of work to make a little bit of impact sometimes. But it's still worth it. And so I went into helping fostered youth because I really had a heart for it. And stayed within that for about 5 years, went into adoptions. It's a beautiful thing to be able to help these kids. And I think it's also can be very hard on the heart, and you can have compassion fatigue from it. You take it home with you. And I would have taken all of these kids home with me had I not been like 20 years old. But they were just amazing kids in a really tough situation that they didn't ask to be a part of. And so for me, that that kept me going until I realized that at some point, for me personally, I just didn't feel that it was healthy for me to stay anymore because I was taking it home with me and it was really hard on my heart.
No, I think that type of work, one, you originally have to have a huge heart and compassion and love to be able to be in that industry. And obviously it can be so heavy in terms of the emotions. So how did you manage those emotional challenges that come with working in foster care, especially when you're dealing with difficult and traumatic situations?
Absolutely. Great question. I am happy to say that there was some training that came along with being in that role. So some experts that would come in and they would teach you how to kind of turn the light switch on and off when you're at work and then when you're at home. And that was helpful. But I think in the long run, it just came down to, at that time, I wasn't married. I didn't have kids. So I did have a little bit more time for self-care. I was also cheering. I actually decided to cheer partially because I knew I needed a healthy outlet to give myself some self-care and something that I really enjoyed. So going into my practices or on the field, that was my time to not think about anything else, right? And that really helped me get through some really dark times where you're working with unfortunately pretty disturbing situations. But then at the same time, it was normally the kids that weren't the problem, right? They're not the problem. It's all the things that come with the situations they're in. So yeah, I would say that the kids kept me going and they'd say, Miss Kara, are you going to adopt me? I'd be like, I wish I could, but they knew I was the snack lady. I always loved, like, I would just munch on snacks. So I had a whole drawer of snacks. So they'd come in and they'd put their little hands out, like, do you have a snack for me? And I'd hand out the snacks. And I just think I look back fondly on these kids and hope that they're doing really well. And that's how I managed, was just finding something that filled my cup outside of work so that when I was there, I could be fully present, but then I would kind of just disconnect and do something that made me happy.
So when you said snacks, like the one thing that came to my mind was like, what kind of snacks are we talking about? Because like I know my kids, and unfortunately for me, like I love snacks too, and I love the goldfish. What kind of snacks were you passing out?
I had pretty healthy snacks back then. Can't say I do now in my pantry, but I used to have, a lot of like the rice cakes and like peanut butter and goodness, I don't remember. I did have a little protein bars, things like that. So I would always just keep them in my drawer because I never was like a meal person. I always just like to snack when I got hungry. So people are always like, how are you always eating? I'm like, I don't know, but it was always just kind of nibbling. But so yeah, they'd come to me and ask me for food. And it was like so sweet and also like kind of heartbreaking. They had their trash bag of clothes and yeah, I just like, my heart goes out to it still. I can barely talk about it. So
yeah, no, I can only imagine. I mean, and I think what you were saying is it was so instrumental to have that type of training where, that whole concept of turning a light switch on and off, when you go home. And then even most importantly, whether in this line of work or in other areas of work, just making sure that you have an outlet, making sure you do have something where you're not completely overly investing everything that you do into this career path. Now, you had also talked briefly about recognizing that you had compassion fatigue. So how did you recognize that within yourself?
That's a great question. I recall I was actually cheering at the time and I was about to go on the news for something about a game and they had a couple of us. I was a captain my last year. And so they had asked us to come in and do an interview. And I was standing there watching the news clip before I went on. And I just remember it was something pretty terrible about a child abuse situation. And I didn't really flinch. It didn't faze me. And I remember thinking, oh, I've seen worse. And at that moment, I was like, I don't know who that is, but that's not me. Like, I don't want to be the person that is just numb to it. And so I made the decision that I was going to leave that, behind. I was in adoptions at the time and I said, I have these 3 kids I want to get adopted. And then I actually knew someone that was looking that would have been a great fit. And so I kind of felt like they were my kids, right? Like I need them to be in good hands. So I actually just thought that the stars aligned and I had the right person to take over. I knew in my heart that I was like starting to become numb. And so for me, just having that compassion fatigue and just being kind of worn down and burnt out from it, I don't know how people do it. I know people are still doing it today and they are like angels. But for me, I knew that was when I needed to shift into using other talents that God had given me and not do that anymore just for my own self care, if you will.
Well, no, and I think just the self-reflection of it and really taking a step back to say, is this working for me? And having that pivotal point, because at times, maybe it lends itself, maybe there's other areas that lend itself better, and we should always invest in ourselves there. What lessons or insights did you gain from that experience?
Absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head. For me, it was about having enough self-awareness to pause and say, what's right for me at this moment? And I think we can all get into kind of a place in our life where we're going through the motions and we don't really stop to say, is this what's best for me? Anxiety is on the rise, depression is on the rise. And sometimes it just takes a moment. My mom had passed away during some of that time too, when I was at 23. And so I just look back at some of those moments and think, I had to kind of let the fog dissipate, if you will, from grief, and then just say, what's good for me right now? And be empowered to make that decision and pivot. And so many times I just want to encourage women that it's okay to pivot. It's okay to say, this is no longer serving me. And where do I need to go next? And how can I use my talents in a way that I will feel my cup is filled. And so I think for me, it was just about pausing enough and having that reflection and then the courage to take the step out of something I've been doing for a long time.
No, I think it's something that, and sorry to hear about your mom so early in age to have lost her, but really taking that moment to, again, that self-reflection. So behavioral health is something that has been very near and dear to your heart. What aspects of the behavioral health industry align with your personal values and your aspirations?
Yeah, absolutely. So behavioral health is something that I've always felt, connection to, having a psychology background and working in social work for so long and seeing kids go through therapy. But for me, my personal core values were, I have a family member that struggles with mental health, and some of it's long-term, pretty chronic, if you will. And so for me, being a family member that's trying to navigate the behavioral health system, which has changed a lot in the past decade, I really felt, I think, a mission and a vision to be a part of the positive change, like increasing access to care, decreasing stigma, and helping more families find access to quality treatment. And it just shouldn't be so difficult to find care and to find the right fit. So I think the pandemic has served us in a sense from that regard, where we've all seen the need that maybe people in this industry have seen for a long time. But now there's this light shining on it, and that's actually helped us immensely in terms of gaining access to more treatment and parity and providers increasing, not only from a payer perspective, but there's been a lot of positive change. That being said, for my mission and my vision of being in this industry, it really just aligned with helping more people, especially my mom was a caregiver. And when she passed, I took on that responsibility. And for me, again, just navigating that system at a young age, I just realized how broken it is. And so it's come a long way, but it's not quite where we want it to be yet. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for that. And so that's what's kept me in this industry for over a decade, because I just see such an opportunity to impact people's lives for the best and help in a way that, like, majority of individuals, whether it be themselves or someone they love, are impacted by anxiety or depression or some sort of mental health concern. And I think that it's just time to make it less of a stigma and just more accessible.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with everything that you just said. And I do think that depending on what happens in our personal life, it can have such a strong influence. Just like you were saying, you had a family member, who was suffering through mental health issues. And, kudos to you again on aligning your purpose and your passion to be able to pursue that. Now, what steps did you take to make that pivotal step between moving from social worker to then behavioral health?
Absolutely. So during my college years, I did work. And so during those times I was in sales and marketing, and I realized that I was really good at that. And so I do think sometimes, like, there's like, for me as a Christian, like, God kind of also was a part of that plan, because I leaned into healthcare and went back into sales and marketing. And I was recruited by an organization that's in behavioral health. And I remember thinking how perfect it was. I remember that very moment. It was like the same feeling I felt when I met my husband. It was this feeling of like, this is too good to be true. Like, this is too much. It's just perfect for me. And I ended up having an amazing mentor who hired me and eventually promoted me into a director. And she just saw something in me with my experience and my passion. And it was just the perfect fit because I believed in what I was doing. I was working for a renowned organization. I learned a ton. And I just am really grateful to her and also the leadership team I had there, the clinical team that really just poured into me. And I was able to, grow my career from that. So I can't take full credit for where I landed, but I definitely think that the path to get there, it's been quite amazing.
Yeah, no, I love that though, because it goes from having that self-reflection to then trusting that process and knowing when something just feels right. And it's almost like these stars align and you have your calling that is just so loud out there for you, and then kind of diving in, and it just feels so natural that it's almost like what I heard from you. It's like you start to question, like, if when you met your husband or when you had this like career path, it's like, is this too good to be true? And it's like, no, sister, this is what was made for you. This is what God had planned for you.
Exactly. And really manifesting, you hear about all this manifestation concept, but I look back and I moved into the healthcare space, which I think was pretty strategic because I knew I wanted to be in healthcare. And just from that and having that sales experience and positioning myself I have the psychology undergraduate, worked in social work. So a lot of those things, I think of the concept of your career as more of a playground than a ladder. And so in a sense, I was putting all the things in place and just taking the next bet. It's almost like Frozen or something, that show that's like, just do the next right thing. Like I just kept doing the next right thing. And as those things, like all I watch are cartoons these days, but
it's okay. You speak my language. I'm following.
Yes. So, the next right thing. And those things really drove me. And so every decision I made, I look back and said, does this create the life that I see myself living? Does this create the life that aligns with who I am? And when you make that decision, you're naturally, when you're putting in the hard work and the effort, but also really evaluating where am I at today and where do I want to be in 5 years? And is this aligned with that? Starting with the end in mind. I really think that was part of it. I didn't know what the next step was, but as it presented itself, I said, this is it. Like, this is where I'm supposed to be.
I love how you said that, your career can be like a playground because it's almost like you're testing all these things. It's not this like linear ladder that you just go up and experience. No, there's certain things that don't feel really good. And that's the time when you need to pivot and trust your gut there. So I love that analogy. Now, what advice do you have for others to find their calling?
Yeah, I would say a lot of self-reflection. When you're looking for your calling, it comes down to probably like 3 things. First, it would be knowing yourself well enough to know like where your value is, right? Like, what do I care about the most? And I would say also, what life do you want to live? Because, at the end of the day, finances do matter. And so you have to kind of think around like, how do I make my talents work for me, but also what kind of life do I want that to be and how do I get there? So I say some people just have a title in mind. I'm like, well, look up that title. Who's doing that now? What was their path to get there? How can you learn from them? What exactly is their day-to-day work, right? Because sometimes it just sounds glorious and then you hear about all the ins and outs and you're like, yeah, I don't think I want to do that. So it's really about doing the work to know yourself and also know, what does that look like? And is that going to provide the life that I want to live? And so I would say those would be like the first 2 points. And then third, it really comes down to like, if you are married or you have a family, it's like, how does that fit in, right? Like, what does that balance look like? I think the person that I am today I have a very different balance than I did 10 years ago. And so I would just encourage people to really do the work to know who they are, what their values are, and then what does it look like that they're driving towards, right? Maybe it's not a title. Maybe it's a lifestyle. Maybe it's hey, I want to have a lot of flexibility in travel. So whatever it is, and then what is it going to take to do that? And how does that fit into your family? Because those things matter too. And so maybe that's too vague of an answer, but that's how I would say for the masses, like what I would sit down and say if I had a 6-month plan to change my life, what am I going to do? And then create small little steps to get there. What do I need to do every day? What decisions do I need to make every day to make this happen? What networking do I need to do to, if I want to branch into a new career path. Who do I need to know? But when you do that, I remember in high school, I thought I wanted to be an occupational therapist for like a hot second. And I did a day where you can shadow. And I realized in that one day that I did not, what I thought it was and what it actually was very different. And so I don't know where that even came from, but I remember just being like, yep, this is definitely not for me. And so, yeah, definitely doing the research and the self-reflection is going to be, no matter if you're 18 or if you're 60 and starting into a new career path, you need to do that.
Oh yeah. I always think that there's like these misconceptions that we build up in our head. And I had the same experience as you. I thought to myself, I want to be a communications leader. And then I realized as I started to learn more about it, I was like, oh, I actually really hate writing. So this is probably going to be problematic. And it's not something that, speaks to my strengths that I was blessed with. But I love what you said because I do think it makes sense. I don't think it's vague. I think we do need to sit down and have some self-reflection of where are we driving to? What is the goal that we're working towards? Is it a lifestyle that we're trying to have? And of course, maybe you need to have these discussions with yourself, with your friends, with your family, whoever you look to for support, because it could change as you start to progress. But even like you said, and I love it, is sitting down, building your network, doing the research to figure out what are the different paths to get you to your goal. Because it's not just one way to get there. There could be multiple options, and you might find that you enjoy half the options or not half, but I think part of it is just exploring. Tell us more about your personal journey. Now, we talked about this like playground and, versus this ladder, but help us to understand your personal success within your career. And most importantly, what were some of the challenges that you ran into?
Yeah, I like that question a lot. I would say, as mentioned, doing the next best thing for yourself is always so important. And I've been blessed to be able to work within organizations that did such great clinical work, made my role in sales pretty easy. So what I would say I really focused on, again, was like becoming an expert in what I knew in behavioral health, knowing my market, really leaning into some natural leadership abilities that I had, and also seeking more leadership training, reading books, like going to trainings, and being a resource for my leader, who was my mentor, to help her during, the growth of our team. So when it came time for, she retired, and I actually cried because I was so sad she was leaving. But she literally, when she threw my name in the ring, so to speak, I was very humbled and honored. And as I grew my career from there, I think what I learned is, leadership is challenging, and managing people is something that like you're blessed with the opportunity to lead others. And I think it's an evolution over time. Like, I haven't arrived today, but I can say I'm much better today than I was 5 years ago. And so what I learned was, as I built my career, through new opportunities. Most of the opportunities I've had, I've been fortunate enough to have been recruited by. I've always made those decisions based on how can I grow and learn. I'm a learner. I don't like to be complacent for too long. And so I've moved into spaces where I'm working in ABA, which is applied behavior analysis for individuals on the autism spectrum. I've worked with primary substance use disorder, primary eating disorder, primary OCD. So I've really tried to expand on some specialties so I can continue to learn, and also learning more about marketing and admission. So I'm constantly saying, how can I learn more? And through that, it actually brings a lot more value to the organizations I work with. And then as far as leadership, I would say continuing to be open to feedback. I think for me, it was about how can I be the best self for my team, and every person needs a different type of leader. So being able to grow, and that can be physically painful. Like when you are like, I'm trying to be my best self, and like I need to be intentional with my leadership every single day. And so I really would say the challenges I had was like, in the beginning, I was a very rigid leader because I was new to it and I was learning, and I was taking over from being a peer to being a leader, which has its own challenges. And I think as I grew from that, I'm in a much better place today in terms of how I lead, but I'm still trying to find mentors and being the best type of leader that I can be for an organization, especially during change management, which we're all facing during, coming out of a pandemic and so forth. So I would say for me, the biggest thing was always like making that next big step, like that, the right thing for me. continuing to expand what I know. And when you lean into your human capital, I got my MBA. I think that always will help add value to the organizations you work with. And that in itself will expand opportunities. And then as a leader, just continuing to grow. Great leaders grow. There's actually a book called that I love. And so great leaders grow, and it's just continuing to educate myself and being open enough to ask for feedback. So whether it be an executive coach, asking your team, asking your leader, just continuing to have that 360 review will help you to grow and become the best version of yourself when you're helping lead a team.
Yeah, no, I think such well said. You're constantly, even as a leader, when you get to that point, you're constantly challenging yourself to be an expert in everything that was given to you, to then leaning into your superpowers and figuring out how can you continue to hone on it, not just relying on them, but then also learning more about cross-functional teams and what they're doing. The other piece you said that resonates so much, which I don't feel like it's talked about enough, is when you make that leap from peer to leader. That is such a challenging step for someone to make within their career. But I think all those things have been massively helpful in terms of advice and things that people should seek out. Now, what were some of the challenges that you feel like as you started to progress in your career and pursuing your passion and purpose, what were some of the challenges along the way?
Absolutely. I would say a couple of things. I've been fortunate enough to really be able to have great leaders throughout my career. And I've actually reported to a lot of females throughout my career, a couple of men too, and a lot of them have been very supportive of my career growth. I would say there's challenges in terms of, like I mentioned, peer, but when you're a peer and you go to being a leader, even if you try to do all the right things to make it a smooth process, it's going to be a little challenging and a little bumpy. I would say in terms of, I did a course on situational leadership, and it talks about different types of, it could be one person with different tasks, and are they an S1 or an S4? So typically what that might mean is, are they capable and willing? Are they capable and unwilling? So there's like 4 different scenarios and how you lead through that. And that was very insightful, because I think through to some of my superstars that I led, and sometimes I was probably either too hands-on when they really didn't need it, or too hands-off and they needed it more. So kind of like leaning through that first phases of leadership that, you kind of grow through. I would also say just having the ability to navigate politics. Politics are in every company, and I used to have this idea that they shouldn't exist. And the reality is they will always exist. And so how do you navigate that? How do you become super collaborative internally? And externally, I was always great in the field, but internally I would be like, well, how do all these pieces connect? And so learning, how do I work with my ops unit and different units within my teams successfully, and navigating those politics? Who has more pull? Who doesn't have more pull? Who do I need to bring in on this? Who's really the leader of the peers in my team? So just kind of like putting a magnifying glass on that took some time. And I would say lastly, knowing who's really in it to support you and who's not. And sometimes you're going to have someone that just doesn't like you, and that's okay. I mean, we all want to be liked, but at the end of the day, we have very different personalities, and it's really about how do we come to the table respectfully and helpfully and have the same goal in mind, to help patients in my, behavioral health experience get into treatment. But sometimes if they don't like you and you kind of pick up on that, it's like, do I have a courageous conversation about it? Have I done something? Or how do we work through this as adults? And so, some of the signs I would say, like if someone's not in it for you, like their feedback may be very personal instead of professional. And when you start to like see those signs, it's about being open to feedback, being curious and not judgmental, and being willing to change the things you may need to change. And then when you realize that sometimes it's not yourself, it's just about how do we create professional boundaries and barriers to work together in a way that makes sense. So those are some things I've learned. And like a lot of people don't talk about that, right? It's kind of one of those things that just go unsaid. But I think as a female, it probably happens a little bit more than we talk about. So I want to bring some light to it, because if we can help females navigate some of the politics within the workplace, not that men don't need the navigation too, but just speaking to the female audience, I think that they would be able to rise in their careers more easily and without the stress that can come from some of those situations. So I've been blessed. I've sought out mentors and leaders and therapy and anything I've had to kind of navigate those waters, but it's not always pretty. But I feel like it's always been worth it.
Yeah, no, but I think those are really good call outs because one, what I was getting from everything that you were sharing from learning through your first phases of becoming a leader and evolving is really what I would call it, is also having that grace to learn that, hey, if I was too involved, this was the impact. When I wasn't overly involved, this was the impact. And then finding ways that you can iterate on your own leadership style to then even having, misconceptions of like politics. I'm with you. It's like, it can be such an ugly word to hear about politics, but sometimes those things are necessary. And they do exist. So how do you start to adapt and to just kind of embrace it? The other piece that you called out that I think is massively helpful is knowing who's in it to support you and who's not. And I think what you end up doing is either one of two things where you identify, is what they're saying personal feedback? Is it professional feedback? Because it could be, perceived differently, but I think understanding and delineating between the two, because I think the other piece that I thought was so powerful that you had mentioned is making sure that you're also creating those professional boundaries, and being confident in being able to create those. Because to your point, I think for some of us, and I've seen this, or I've even had it for myself, where you just either clam up or you become overly emotionally invested, which, it takes all your energy. And I think it's also important, the other piece you called out, which is while you're going through all of this, you also need coaching as you're learning and you're leaning in, whether that's through therapy or a mentor or somebody within your network that you need to lean on. So all really good nuggets. If we go to more, I'm going to switch topics. And from your personal experience, when you felt your worth may have been underestimated, how did you find the courage to not back down and stand up for yourself?
Absolutely. I think that's such a great question because so many of us struggle with this, being on two sides of that coin, right? Either your worth is being questioned and you have more to offer. And in that regard, in those experiences, I would say, well, documentation is always ideal, right? Like documenting all the things that you bring to the table. For instance, an example I can say is I remember being in a role where I was traveling a lot, working 90-hour work weeks, and had a newborn at home. And I remember thinking, I'm not going to let the ball drop because that's just not who I am. But something has to change because I can't keep living like this. And I want the best for the company and also for myself. And I knew the worth that I was bringing to the table, but I felt unseen because I was always on the road and no one saw me in person and I wasn't at corporate. And so I created a list of all of the things that I had accomplished, or like as a team we had accomplished, or I had accomplished individually. And I shared that with my leader and said, hey, here's all the things that I feel that I really brought to the table. And this is what things are looking like right now for me. And I know that when I'm not in person, and this is before virtual work was a thing, but I was doing it often. I said, I don't always feel like these things are seen. And I just want to get your feedback and share like my perspective where I'm at, and help me understand like where I can grow, but also how do you feel where does this land with you? And I remember that conversation because she came to me and said, I feel that you actually do way more than this. Like this, I agree with your list, and I think you do even more than this. And we actually want to give you a raise. And I didn't go into that meeting asking for a raise, although I do think that's a great tactic if you're trying to receive that. But it was one of those things where I just said, I've done my market research. I did know I was not being paid what I probably should have been for what I was doing. My title wasn't aligned with what I was doing. So I did the research, and then I brought it to the table in a very professional way, in a very clear way, and in a very documented way, saying this is where I feel I have brought value and help me learn. And I was curious, and it did produce results. I was able to, to get a raise out of that from a financial perspective, but I also was able to support my team in saying infrastructure is needed to support the team that went from 6 to 20. I'm no longer able to be everywhere and be everything to everyone. So how do we create a structure that will support the individuals that I care about and I lead in a way that is meaningful for them and for the organization? Because turnover is expensive. We want to keep our people and we want to support them. So a lot of that just took the ability to do the research to lay it out in a very clear and concise way. And then to also have some solutions for what did that mean for the organization. And so that's how I would suggest people leaning in when they don't feel that their worth is seen. And then at the end of the day, if it goes the other way and someone says, no, I don't think that you're bringing this to the table, I would say after some self-reflection on what can I do differently, if you feel that there's not a lot you can do differently, or that then it might be a good time to look for another opportunity, right? Like sometimes, you want to be where, what do they say? When a flower doesn't bloom, you don't change the flower, you change the environment. So at that point, I would say evaluating where you're at and if it's the right place for you, if you're doing all the things and the feedback is something that you just feel like, I know what I'm worth and this isn't serving me anymore. So those would be my suggestions.
Oh, Kara, that was so good. That was so good. I feel like there's so many people who have at some point, whether it's now, in the past, or in the future, they've reached that point where they feel like, hey, look, I know I'm not getting paid what I'm worth. I know that I'm doing more, but the way that you position and the approach that you took was more soliciting the feedback and making sure, though, that you very strategically, you did your research, you documented their accomplishments. Now, I feel like, though, a challenge for people can be taking credit for an accomplishment without coming across, and I know this has been the same for me, without coming across too boastful or egotistical. So how did you learn how to confidently acknowledge your contributions and your expertise?
I think that's so good because it's both, right? I feel like in the beginning of my career, when I was a bit younger, I probably said I more than we, and took a little bit more credit unintentionally, just as, unaware. As I've grown, I have learned that a we approach is really helpful in giving others the credit. And now as a leader, I don't care to get the credit, but back, and sometimes I still need it and I will advocate for it. But I would say in those instances where you've most certainly contributed, there's nothing wrong with saying that you've contributed. I just think it means giving all the right credit to the right people and ensuring that you're not taking all of the credit, because it takes a village. It takes a team to do something. So if you're calling out everyone and then you can just say, hey, this is what I've done to contribute to this success, I personally think that we should be doing that more. And I won't get on a horse or about this, but I do feel really passionately that I think women from a young age typically are trained to maybe not always take the credit. And I think those things are changing in our culture, but it might feel uncomfortable, but I say do it. In the end of the day, it's okay to take the credit for the things that you have contributed in a very professional and kind way. Just don't take all the credit if there's credit to give elsewhere too. It's a balance. So, and I mean, that's a big answer because it's hard to say. Every situation's a bit different. Sure. So wordsmithing it, but it's okay to say, I've contributed and this is how.
Yeah. But I think even, in part of, I think back to part of that discussion with your leader, it's also empowering those on your team or even your peers. You don't necessarily need to even have a team, but empowering your peers to identify certain gaps within the business so that, again, at the end of the day, you're looking out for the business, you're looking out for your team. Now, what practical tips and strategies do you recommend for individuals to prepare, performance reviews are coming up, or maybe there's salary negotiations? How can they better prepare to confidently present their case for a raise or a promotion?
Yeah, I think what I would suggest again is a lot of the research that I've seen people say, well, I think I'm worth this and this is why, and they send it out and it's a little bit maybe reactive. I would say being proactive. It's about knowing your organization well enough to know where there are gaps and helping solve those problems and how to do that with your talents. And so as you're kind of creating that landscape, it's not only keeping track of all the things that you have. Maybe you get a great kind email from someone giving you kudos. Save those. It's also good to read those on hard days. Save those. And then also just create that list of things that you've contributed. Have a clear idea of what others are being compensated in your position. Do the evaluation to see what's your next step within that organization, or what is your goal? I ask every person that reports to me, where do you want to be in 2 years and 5 years? And if it's not here, that's okay. Let's talk about your goals and how do we help you get there? Because ultimately people will be invested if they know that you care about them, if they know that you care about the next step in their career. So knowing yourself, what you want that next step to be, you can kind of create that pathway and then just show through that, like I did when you go into a performance review, have those things listed concisely. And then of course, be ready for feedback, be ready to say, hey, this is where I want to be. And like, what does it take to get there? If I'm not ready for that now, what do I need to work on in the next quarter or 6 months or year to do that? And so being able to have that courageous conversation. And, when we think about giving credit, I just wanted to say, like, also, like when you're in those situations, I think of a time where I led an admissions team and I was collaborating with operations and sales, and there was just a lot of key stakeholders and internally. And so it came down to, we created milestones of success, and like, what does success look like? What do we want in 30 days and 60 days and 90 days in each of these areas? And then we created some fun, challenges, who could get there faster, and they would get prizes, and we would give shout outs. And at the end, it came down to, when you present that to your executive team or your board or whoever you're presenting to, it's really highlighting the success of those teams. And even if as a leader, you're not getting the direct credit, like your team's shining, which naturally is going to help. You know what I mean? Like, it's not always about like your name being on it. I think it just goes to show like, oh my gosh, like you're doing such a fantastic job. Your team's doing such a fantastic job. So I just wanted to give that example of like how you can work with each department in this instance, and give them kudos and create an environment of cohesion, which naturally is just going to help you as a leader. You're in the background, but it's just like a coach of a football team. Like, your team wins, like that coach is doing a great job too, right? So just wanted to kind of go back to that and give an example. But in terms of advocating and performance reviews, those can always be nerve-wracking. And as a perfectionist, like I was always like, I got a 3 out of 5. What is that? But like, I think it's evaluating where you're at. If you're new in your role, that's good. But in a year from now, like, where do you want to be and what does it take to get there? How do you become a 5, right? How do you become an A+ at what you're doing?
So many creative examples and even just advice that you have just shared with the group here. And I think the other reminder, and I loved how you said this, I'm not going to say it as good as you did, but always recognize as well that you are a flower. And if you're not blooming, it's time to change up that environment. So
100%.
As we start to close out here, in a world full of possibilities, what mark do you dream of leaving as a trailblazer for future generations of empowered women?
Oh, I love that question. It's one of those things that it's such a big question, right? Because it's your legacy. It's your life. I would say in threefold. When I think of my legacy now as a mom, I do think of my kids first, because I think, how do I help them have a social responsibility that leads them to lean in to what they were created for? And when I think about women in the workforce, or just women out there, even if they're a stay-at-home mom, that is the workforce. Like, that's a hard job. I would say 3 things would matter most to me. It's leaning into who you are as a person, and I always think that, I ask God, break my heart for what breaks yours, because we've all been given either experiences in life or something in our heart that says, I really want this to be better. And I think that we're the hands and feet to do that. So whatever breaks your heart that makes you want to make the world a better place, lean into it, because that can be part of your purpose. And so as we all do that for ourselves, we find what fills our cup, what we're good at, then we can create our own legacies. So my hope is, being a behavioral health expert, if you will, in the sales space and leading a team, my hope is that I can create greater access to care, to where, as I'm creating an environment for women to step in and also lead in this industry, that we can create a better future for individuals that are struggling to get access to care. And so, because that's something I'm really passionate about, I'm blessed to have that as a career. And my hope is, my legacy is that, the landscape of our behavioral health will change in the next 10 years. And I want to be a part of that. And as my kids see me doing that, I'm hoping that what they will do is lean into who they are and do the same thing. And if you're doing that and others are doing that, women are going to be inspired to say, I've really cared about a certain advocacy. I need to get more involved. And we slowly but surely see the world change for the better that way.
Oh, so good. So good. Kara, I appreciate you. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. And as we wrap up today's session, let's remember that in supporting one another, we amplify our strengths and we break down barriers. So go out there, champion for your dreams, empower your peers, and continue to shape a future where every woman realizes her true potential. Until next time, see ya.